There is something deeply intriguing about megaprojects. Their scale, ambition, and sometimes their surprising uselessness. We are surrounded by examples of monumental undertakings that, despite all the investment of time, resources, and human effort, end up being underutilized, abandoned, or completely useless. Throughout this video, we will explore some of these impressive examples. Mirabel Airport. Imagine an airport capable of handling 50 million passengers per year. That's right, you heard correctly. We're talking about Mirabel Airport, a true colossus of aviation. In other words, the entire population of Canada could board at Mirabel in a single year. Incredible, isn't it? However, since 2004, not a single passenger has boarded or disembarked at Mirabel. So what happened to this giant of aviation? Let's go back in time to the 1970s when Montreal reigned as the main gateway to Canada. All transatlantic flights landed at Dorval Airport in the city. But with the country's growth as a tourist destination, the Canadian government began to worry about Dorval's capacity to handle the increasing demand. Thus, the need for a new, larger, and more modern airport arose. Mirabel Airport. The construction of this engineering marvel took 5 years and cost a staggering 500 million Canadian dollars, equivalent to billions today. Inaugurated with great enthusiasm in 1975, Mirabel was, in terms of capacity, the largest airport on the planet. But here's the twist. The transportation connections to Mirabel were terrible. Getting to the airport was a real saga. Plans for a high-speed rail line were abandoned, leaving access limited to a slow and unreliable bus service. Meanwhile, the city of Toronto emerged as a more attractive alternative for travelers, with more efficient transportation connections. And so, Mirabel was relegated to obscurity. Nowadays, the sleeping giant of Mirabel Airport is used only for cargo flights and recreational activities. Parts of the airport have been transformed into locations for film and television productions. A true Canadian Hollywood, Mirabel may not be what was originally planned, but it still leaves us in awe with its fascinating history. Now, let's take a look at the city of Eko Atlantic, a megaproject initiated in Nigeria. Eko Atlantic is not an ordinary city. Consider the land on which the city is being built, completely artificial. The Atlantic Ocean has been eroding Nigeria's beaches for millions of years. In 2003, the Nigerian government decided to address this problem by removing some of the ocean's sand and using it to build a new artificial peninsula. The construction of Eko Atlantic was planned to be on this structure. We're talking about a luxurious city full of skyscrapers with housing for nearly 250,000 people. The city would be practically the opposite of the famous Atlantis, a city rising from the waves instead of sinking into the ocean. In recent years, the Nigerian government accomplished the difficult part, creating a sandy peninsula protected from the sea by an impressive wall called the Great Wall of Lagos, which prevents the peninsula from being washed away by the currents. Overall, this can be considered a fairly impressive feat. However, there are quite a few controversial points regarding the construction of this artificial island. The landmass interrupts the natural flow of the ocean, negatively affecting many local species and some people. For example, in 2012, the beach of a nearby island in the Atlantic Ocean was flooded, resulting in the death of several people. The exact cause of this was unknown, but experts linked the incident to the disruption of local currents caused by Eko Atlantic. Additionally, the development of the city on the landmass seems not to be going very well. Currently, the peninsula is almost empty, except for a series of residential towers completed in 2016. Strangely, some people moved there initially. Imagine the life of those people, looking out the window and seeing just a strip of sand outlining non-existent streets and dusty roads. This was definitely not what was planned. Initially, the Nigerian government wanted this ambitious project to be completed by now. However, despite all the delays, the authorities have not given up yet. The island is still under development, and new buildings are being constructed slowly but steadily. So, perhaps the project will be completed one day. Even so, in its current state, Eko Atlantic is just an almost useless and deserted artificial landmass. In 1973, the Filipinos decided to build a nuclear power plant. In fact, many countries were pursuing the same goal at that time. For example, the Filipino project occurred 10 years before the Chernobyl disaster, and many countries were experimenting with nuclear energy without fully understanding the potential dangers. The failed project also aimed to transform the Philippine economy, and you could say it succeeded. However, not in the way the government had hoped. Construction began, and although the process was quite slow, the first few years seemed promising. At least until someone had the brilliant idea to conduct safety inspections. But why hadn't they done this before? We don't know the answer, but better late than never, right? During the inspections, they discovered more than 4,000 issues with the construction, some quite serious. For example, there was a geological fault nearby, meaning the region was at risk of earthquakes. So, did no one check this beforehand? Seems absurd, but we haven't even gotten to the worst part. There was a volcano right next to the plant. No one in their right mind would build a nuclear plant at the foot of a volcano, right? The project should have been canceled at that point, but since so much money had already been spent, the government decided to continue. In the process, the project's cost quickly escalated as they fixed as many of the 4,000 identified problems as possible. By 1984, when the plant was completed, the total construction cost had reached $2 billion. However, before the plant could begin operating, the Chernobyl disaster occurred, showing the world how dangerous a faulty nuclear plant could be. The Filipino government then faced a difficult decision. The plant they had worked on for years was ready and operational. Was it worth the risk? In the end, the government decided that opening the plant would be a bad idea, and the project was canceled. On the other hand, the government considered converting the plant to use coal or oil. However, it was found that transforming the plant into another type of power plant would cost more than building a new plant from scratch. As a result, the structure became a completely pointless $2 billion project. For a country like the Philippines, this was a huge financial loss, so much so that it took 30 years to pay off the wasted money. However, in terms of health and safety, the decision made was completely correct. Why? Well, remember the volcano next to the plant? It erupted in 1991. Moreover, this wasn't the only nuclear power plant abandoned before it began operating. Around the same time, Austria built a nuclear power plant. After the project was completed, there was a referendum on whether to open the plant, and the people voted to shut it down. Wouldn't it have been more sensible to hold the referendum before building the plant? The South China Mall was another story of failure. In 2005, the city of Dongguan in southern China spent over $1 billion to build the largest mall in the world. This enormous mall had space for hundreds of thousands of visitors and over 2,000 stores. However, 3 years after its opening in 2008, more than 99% of the commercial space was empty. The mall invited hundreds of brands to open stores there, but none were interested in the project. In fact, there were a few fast food chains at the entrance, but beyond that, the place was completely abandoned. This was mainly due to the economy. Dongguan was a relatively poor city, so there wasn't much demand for the luxury clothes, jewelry, and electronics that one would find in such a mall. Retailers knew this and therefore avoided the mall. It didn't make sense to open a store in a mall where it was unlikely to attract a sufficient customer base. In the following years, the place became known as a ghost mall, completely empty despite being the largest mall in the world. This situation persisted for more than a decade. In 2019, there was a turnaround. The mall was revamped to attract low-income customers, with food stalls and night markets, becoming a place more suitable for the local community. As a result, the mall began to gain popularity, and retailers started to take an interest. Currently, more than 80% of the space is occupied, and the former ghost mall has transformed into a bustling and prosperous center. When you look at satellite images of London, a large white canopy at the tip of the Greenwich Peninsula catches your eye. Today, the site is known as the O2 Arena and is considered one of the most popular venues in the world. But it wasn't always like this. A few years ago, this enormous structure was a very different place. In the late 1990s, the British government planned an innovative event called the Millennium Experience, a collection of massive exhibitions and shows to celebrate the start of the new millennium, lasting for 1 year. The event would begin on New Year's Day 1999 and end on New Year's Day 2000, and it was decided that it would be held under a huge dome. The structure would be built over the Greenwich Meridian Line, with 12 support towers representing the 12 hours of the day, the 12 months of the year, and the 12 constellations of the sky. The support towers formed a network of steel cables that supported a dome made of polymer fabric. All of this was extremely impressive, but there was one question on everyone's mind. What would happen to the dome after the end of the year 2000 and the Millennium Experience? It turned out that the British government didn't have an answer for this. They thought about selling the dome to a local sports team but couldn't find a suitable buyer. They considered moving the structure to another city, but that would have been too expensive. As a result, the dome remained there, with an enormous maintenance cost of £1 million per month. Around the same time, the media began criticizing the waste of taxpayers' money, and finally, a private company called Meridian Delta offered to buy the structure. However, nothing changed. The dome remained empty. In 2007, something miraculous happened. The Millennium Dome reopened its doors, transformed into a sports and entertainment venue with bars, restaurants, and a central stage with 20,000 seats. Since its official reopening as the O2 Arena, the venue has been quite successful. So, this mega project is no longer useless. You probably know about the artificial islands Palm Jumeirah off the coast of Dubai. But did you know there's another group of islands just a few kilometers away? We're talking about the World Project, which Dubai has been developing since 2003. These islands represent the continents of Europe, Africa, Asia, North America, South America, Antarctica, and Oceania. Each island represents a country or landmark, such as France, New York, or Mount Everest. These artificial islands were built by collecting sand from the ocean floor and piling it into mounds. Additionally, there is a massive breakwater around the islands. The construction of the islands took several years and cost billions of dollars. However, building the islands was just the beginning. Once the construction was completed, the Dubai government began selling them for millions of dollars, inviting people to transform them as they wished. In the first few months, most of the islands were sold to companies or wealthy individuals. There were plans to turn North America and Europe into luxury resorts, build a hotel in Shanghai, open a health and wellness center in Siberia, and even a pub in Ireland. However, none of these plans materialized, and the islands remained deserted, just empty mounds of sand. There are a few exceptions, such as a beach club on Lebanon Island, a mall in North America, and some construction projects in Antarctica and Europe. Other than that, there isn't much to see. This is mainly due to infrastructure problems. When the islands were built, there were plans to connect them with underwater cables and pipelines, providing water and electricity, as well as waste removal. However, setting up this network of cables was more difficult than expected, and the island developers had to rely on diesel generators for electricity and water transportation. Additionally, there was supposed to be a road linking the islands to the mainland, but that project was also not realized. Thus, it was challenging to start any construction on the islands. This was not the only artificial island project that failed in Dubai. In 2005, the Dubai government built 2 other giant artificial islands, but then ran out of money and suspended the project, leaving a quarter of the sand to sink. In 2022, work on the islands resumed, but only time will tell if the project will be completed. During this period, another set of palm-shaped islands, Palm Jebel Ali, was also constructed. The project was technically completed, but there is nothing on the island, and it has been on hold for years with no signs of resumption anytime soon.